ton to talk about today with our friend Phil Steele of philsteele.com and the great magazine that many of you probably already have. How are you, Phil?
I am doing great, Bill. Good to hear your voice again, my friend.
Great to hear from you, too. I couldn't be more excited. This is one of my favorite segments of the week every week, and we're going to do it every Wednesday. We're going to talk football, Utah, BYU, Utah State in the state of Utah. We'll talk national stuff as well, preseason top 25s for now, and all kinds of good stuff. But I think you and I talked a couple of times in the offseason. This is potentially setting up, and you were one of the first people on board nationally with this, Phil, and everybody else. A lot of people have jumped on it since then, but you're very high on the team Kyle Whittingham has, and you've called him one of your kind of dark horse sleepers to make the playoffs.
Yeah, they are my number one surprise team this year. And, last year my number one surprise team was the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Notre Dame were not in the top 10 at the start of the year, but I said they were a possible playoff team, and lo and behold, they ran the table and made the playoff. And when you look at Utah this year, I love the strength of the defensive line. I rate it the best defensive line in the country. Extremely deep. They go about 11 deep, 6 or 7 NFL guys potentially in that group. And then you look at the secondary. They've got a shutdown corner. The offense lost their quarterback in Huntley and star running back Zach Moss to injury. 5 games to go. Still made it to the Pac-12 title game. Still nearly won the Pac-12 title game last year. Those guys are back. The replacements are back. I think they're strong throughout. A little disappointed Manny Bowen left the team at linebacker, but still high on the linebacking unit. And, of course, if Kyle Whittingham's the head coach, they're going to have a strong special teams. I don't care if they have to replace their kicker and punter. They'll be solid in that category. And then you follow it up with the schedule, Bill. And, the 2 toughest road games are USC, a team I thought Utah just flat-out dominated last year, and then Washington. And Washington only has 2 starters back on defense. Those are the 2 big road tests, and I can paint a picture where Utah could potentially run the table and make the college football playoff.
Just a note for you, Phil, the guy that stepped in for Manny Bowen, Devin Lloyd, was going to be the 3rd linebacker. Very high on him. He's had a very good fall camp, according to the coaches, 6'3", 235-pound redshirt sophomore. So I think they're looking for big things out of Devin Lloyd this fall.
Yeah, they were, and he was the most improved player on the defense in the spring. And when I talked to Coach Whittingham, he said he was the next guy up at linebacker. It'd be nice to have him as a backup and filling in on all 3 of the positions. But you're right, there probably won't be too much of a drop off in the starting lineup there, and Lloyd should fill the gap well.
So as we look at it, you mentioned Utah's a dark horse team for your playoffs, but you don't have them as a playoff team right now. As we sit here today, and again, it's August 21st. The season hasn't begun yet, but who are you projecting right now, Phil, for the playoffs?
Well, going way out on a limb here, Bill, I'm taking Alabama and Clemson as 2 of my playoff teams. How about that?
You're crazy, Phil. That is nuts.
And, when you look at Clemson this year, defending national champs, offense is going to be perhaps the best in the country. They've got the best quarterback in Lawrence. And then you take a look at the defense. Despite the fact they lose all of their defensive linemen from last year, 3 first-round draft picks and a third-round draft pick, I still rate them the 5th best defensive line in the country. So they're in good shape. They're actually going to be at least a 17-point favorite in every single game this year, at least 17 points. And with Alabama, last year they only had 3 starters back on defense. This year they got 6. They've got Tua back. They've got their best receiving core in the country, one of the top offensive lines. They'll fight Clemson for that number 1 offense in the country. Defense is better than last year, and they'll be a double-digit favorite in every single game this year. So it sure looks like we might be headed for another Alabama-Clemson rematch. And for the other 2 teams in the Final Four, Bill, I went with Georgia. If you look at Georgia, they're probably a better team than they were last year. They've got DeAndre Swift at running back. They've got Jake Fromm at quarterback. They've got my number 2 rated offensive line in the country, an improved defense, solid on special teams. They're an even better team than they were last year. I think they'll be favored in all 12 games. They do have a couple of tough road games this year, but including one in Jordan-Hare where they have to play Auburn, but I still have them favored in all 12. And remember the last 2 years, they've lost twice to Alabama, but they have trailed in those games by a combined 1 minute and 4 seconds in both games combined, which tells you they were pretty much in control of both games. So they're a threat to Alabama. And my other team, And I know a lot of folks have been jumping on the Michigan bandwagon in recent years, jumping up saying, hey, this is the year, this is the year. I haven't been one of them. I've picked Ohio State to win the Big Ten or top Michigan 11 straight years, and they have done it in 10 of those 11 years. But for the first time in 12 years, I'm calling for Michigan to get past Ohio State. I love their offensive line. 4 potential All-American candidates on the offensive line. They're switching the offense to the spread offense, which is the perfect fit for Shea Patterson. I like the receiving core, lots of speed. The special team's one of the best in the country. Defensively, Don Brown always has a top 10 defense. And their toughest 3 opponents this year, Ohio State, Michigan State, Notre Dame, are all at home. And keep in mind, Ohio State only has 1 starter back on the offensive line, loses their quarterback that had 50 touchdown passes last year, and loses some guy at head coach. Name sort of skips my head, but he's one of the top head coaches out there, and he's no longer on the sidelines. I'm sure Utah fans might remember him.
Yeah, they might have a recollection. I might have done his coach's show for a year, too. Yeah, he's now doing TV, I think. So Michigan, Georgia, Alabama, and Clemson for you.
That's right. Those are the 4 I'm going with, and then my dark horse this year is the Utah Utes.
So let me ask you, as you look at Utah, and they're coming out of the Pac-12, that we've talked about this in the offseason, Phil, and it's kind of been a point of discussion. Everything's kind of come together. A lot of guys came back that could have gone to the NFL draft. Veteran group, Andy Ludwig back again here as offensive coordinator, Kyle Whittingham's guy. The schedule really lightens up, and that's good for the regular season. But we've kind of joked here, the schedule, while it's advantageous to win the Pac-12 conference perhaps this year, it might not be as advantageous to win or get a playoff spot because Utah may only play 3 ranked teams this year, Phil. They may only play Washington, maybe Washington State in the 4th week, and I don't know what SC will be when they play them. Maybe they come back and see another ranked team in a Pac-12 championship game, but if Utah's going to get to the playoffs, do they have to run the table, or could a one-loss Utah team reach the playoffs?
Yeah, a lot depends on what else is out there. If you have a whole bunch of 2-loss teams, naturally they're in. I think as long as they have a loss advantage on the other conferences, there's no way the Pac-12 gets excluded. And also, Bill, I will say this. I feel the Pac-12, whereas in past years, the last 2 years, I've rated it the 5th best conference in college football. This year, I rate it the 3rd best conference in college football. I think we're going to see a jump in Pac-12 play, better non-conference play, and all that's going to help Utah in the long run. But, if Utah's got a 1-game advantage over another conference champ, Utah's in the playoff. But you're right. If they do tie, let's say, with a Big Ten champ and they each have 1 loss this year, I would have to say the Big Ten champ would get in because of the schedule strength.
Hey, Phil, how much do you think a uniform conference schedule across the board among the Power 5 leagues would level the playing field a little bit? Certainly it would impact the SEC and ACC where they only play 8 conference games. But how much would it help, say, a Pac-12 or a Big 12 or a Big 10 where they play the 9 conference games?
I think it would help a lot because playing that 9th game, as we've seen with the exclusion from the playoffs, the losses tend to come up there more, and you tend to lose more games. So I think if everybody played 9 games, it would definitely level out the playing field, and we wouldn't have that in future years.
Talking to our friend Phil Steele. He'll join us every Wednesday at this time in the fall. We'll talk to him next week about the rivalry game per se. I would like to get a couple of quick thoughts from you on Gary Anderson going back to Utah State and the team you think he has in the Mountain West there, and Kalani Sitake's team down at BYU. Not so much matchups, but the teams heading into the seasons.
With Utah State, I love Jordan Love. I mean, he's a quarterback that's highly underrated, one of the best in the country, and Utah State's defense should be very good this year. Tipi Kalea, David Woodward back at the linebacker spots, all 3 defensive linemen back, and they're pretty good up front to begin with. This is a loaded Utah State defense. But my question marks are what's surrounding Jordan Love on the offensive side of the ball. They do have Jared Bright back, but they lose a 1,000-yard rusher in Thompson. They lose their top 5 receivers from last year, and just 1 returning starter on the offensive line. Now, size is not going to be an issue on the offensive line. They just lack experience up front. Gary Anderson's pretty good at molding it, but I don't think we're going to see Jordan Love and company put up the 47.5 points per game and nearly 500 yards per game they did last year when they had 9 returning starters as they dropped to 2. Their Make My Stock Market report is a team trending down this year after reaching a huge level of 11 wins last year. Utah State was actually my number 2 most improved team in the country last year. This year I think they take a step back, but not too far of a step back. I think you're probably looking at a 7 or 8 win season. Utah State's still pretty formidable, but I don't think they're quite as good as last year's team due to the inexperience on offense. And with BYU, they're a dangerous team. You know, you got a quarterback there in Zach Wilson who really came on at the end of the year. He, of course, had the perfect bowl game. He's a guy who NFL scouts are starting to look at as a potential guy down the road. They add in a Tyson Williams, a running back, a grad transfer from South Carolina, to go along with Lapini Katoa. And so I think they're pretty good at the running back core. The receivers are solid with Hefo, Romney, and Simon. Offensive line, they've got 3 starters back. And defensively, just like Utah State, the bulk of the defense returns. They got 8 starters back on the defensive side of the ball and had a pretty good defense last year, giving up just 324 yards per game. My biggest question mark for BYU is the schedule. Holy cow. Utah to open up, at Tennessee, USC, Washington, and even the next 2 games, Bill, at Toledo, at USF. Those are 2 of the favorites in their conferences, and they're long road trips for BYU. Then follow that up with Boise State and a road trip to Utah State. Those are 8 games that are extremely difficult to start the season. The end of the season's much easier, but wow, I hope they survive those first 8 games this year.
Is Tennessee on the rise in your mind? That's the second game for BYU, and it's at Neyland Stadium. They've got to come off that Utah game, which will be tough and hard and physical, and they've got to go to Knoxville in front of 100,000. Is it going to be a better year in year 2 for Jeremy Pruitt?
Yeah, much better year. They made my most improved list. They only went 5-7 last year. At one point, they were 5-5 and had a chance to get there, but really finished the season on a down note. But Garantano's back at quarterback this year. I think you'll see him be vastly improved. They've got the one thing that Pruitt wanted when he took over is he wanted a big offensive line. Last year in July, they had 2 guys on the offensive line that were 300 pounds. This year, they have 15 guys on the offensive line, so he's building the team the way he wants it. They brought in 2 of the top true freshman tackles coming out of high school, and Darnell Wright and Wanya Morris, number 1 and number 4 rated offensive tackles coming out of high school. I think both will start. If they have a weakness, it's on the defensive line. They're a little thin up front and not overwhelming. They've got Aubrey Solomon, but little else. But the back 7 is solid, so everything is good with Tennessee except the defensive line's the biggest question mark. I've got them winning 8 games this year.
The question I've asked everybody this summer, I think we would all agree, everybody, even the most ardent Pac-12 South fans, not named Utah fans. Utah's the class of the Pac-12 South and maybe the class of the conference overall. But if I ask you today on August 21st, Phil Steele, who do you think the second best team in the South is?
I'm going to go with USC. I like the talent level. I know last year was not the normal USC season, but man, I'm really excited to watch JT Daniels throw into a whole bunch of first and second round draft picks. And Amon St. Brown, Vaughns, Pittman, Williams, they're loaded at receiver. They're playing in the Texas Tech style offense. And JT Daniels now a true sophomore. Don't expect him to look like he did last year. That's going to be pretty exciting. And defensively, they simplified things. But USC has got a tough schedule, so I could see a team like Arizona State sneaking up there, and you cannot discount UCLA. They came on in the second half of the last year. And then how about Arizona? You know, Kevin Sumlin did not limit Khalil Tate's running ability just because he wanted to. Tate was banged up last year. He says he's 100% healthy this year. I think you may see the Khalil Tate of 2017 return. So the South is it's part of the reason that I've got the Pac-12 rated as the 3rd best conference out there.